Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by my good friend Ian C. Esslemont. Hello, Ian. How are you doing?
Hello, AP. Thanks for having me and this
Well,
opportunity.
I'll actually just call you Cameron because it's weird calling you Ian, even though that's your nom de plume.
That's my official first name, but
Um,
Cameron is just fine.
um, so we were going to discuss because I've been talking quite a lot about techniques about writing that readers should be aware of. You'd suggested that we have a bit of a chat about writing workshops, particularly for genre writers. And this is something that obviously you have a lot more experience of than I do. Because when I was teaching creative writers, it was always from that structural point of view and about analysis and what is in a narrative. Whereas I think you writers obviously come at it from a craft perspective.
Yes, many people who focus in literature can often go all the way through an English program without ever encountering, the creative writing side of things. Never been in a workshop or taken one, and so it can be sort of another beast for people who are focused on lit studies.
And obviously lit studies far superior. I mean that.
Here we get the rivalry within the major. Um, yeah, so as has come up in the past, Steve and I, we were in an undergrad degree program for creative writing, which was workshop based with a literature a facet as well. And so you would take, not only would you take the workshop, you would also take literature courses. Or editing courses and script writing courses and that sort of thing. And that's a very common format, at least it used to be, for the workshop and the creative writing programs. And then I went on to do a master's. And there, again, it was the workshop was the center, but you also had a literary component. So you would take credits in literary courses, and this, of course, would helped you read around and educate you in the broader field that you claim to be entering. That's, of course, that's just one format.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's a lot of other ones that are strictly practical, strictly workshop only, no requirement for extra literary courses or things like that. Or you could have low residence programs where you're not even there. You might be Zooming, or you might be submitting and showing up just for a couple weeks to do the in-person stuff, and the rest of the time you're off on your own.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that people I think misunderstand is a lot of the time when we talk about creative writing and they go, oh, but I can't be a writer. I've never gone on one of these courses. And it's that creative writing courses and creative writing classes and writers groups, these are all shortcuts because obviously the way that authors traditionally did it for hundreds of years was you read everyone around you. You read all of these books, anything that you admired, you then tried to work out what it was that they were doing on the page and how they did it. And then once you'd worked that out, you then borrowed the idea and you
Emulated.
emulated you emulated their techniques. You took from what other authors had done before in the works that you'd read and you used them yourself. And workshops, in a way, are a shortcut because someone's put together various exercises for you to do, or has a selection of texts for you to read that exemplify certain techniques. And so someone's done part of the hard work for you, and then they are there to guide you through it. And that's more the lit side of it, as far as I know, because that's what we do. We go through works of literature and we point out how things are done and different techniques and different ways to understand it.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
with that, it's a guiding process.
mhm.
But I think you have experience of the more craft focused aspects, both at undergrad and then moving on from undergrad, which I need to ask you about, but then a higher level of it. So with undergrad, when you go into a course like that, is it presupposed that you already have a body of work that you've done or that you are engaged in? Or is it
Mostly no. Of course, there are some programs that have a portfolio requirement or instructor permission, but generally, no. You can just apply. If it's a 101, if it's a first year thing, you can just get in because you're interested in writing or want to look into it. But before we go this deep into it, I'd like to step back and talk about what a workshop is or should be, and how in the past, at least when it was, I've encountered some what I would call toxic environments,
okay?
which it can sometimes. So the premise behind it was actually questioned academically when it first came in. And a lot of the sort of old dinosaurs in the English departments and said, "Oh, well, you can't teach creativity. That's ridiculous," and and poo-pooed the whole idea of creative writing being taught at all at university level. So it had a rocky beginning, and then often it wasn't used maybe as the best sort of technique that it is. It was used sometimes to create a sort of an authorial author's court, where the author would hold forth on the things that he or she knows, and was maybe more interested in the ego side of what the opportunity presented rather than helping the young writers. So that's one sort of dangerous side road that it can fall down into. And another sort of problem is where it can become, well, writing is often regarded as a means of therapy. And the workshop could descend into that sometimes. It can just become a group therapy session, where people talk about their feelings or what have you, and they're not really addressing the craft of writing. They're just using it to vomit up their emotions, and everyone gets a turn. And then there's sort of another third one that is the more common problem in workshopping environment, which is the deathmatch arena, where you come in and you assassinate everybody and and destroy what has been given you, and it's very confrontational and combative. And then, of course, you get all in a huff when your work is similarly attacked, right? Of course. And that's another misuse of, I think, of the workshop format, where it's not, where it's used to sort of just push down everybody and critique and assassinate. So then what is, what should a workshop be? And I want to stress here that it's supposed to be constructive. It's supposed to be where you are in a contractual agreement where everyone's trying to do their best to improve the work that's been submitted. Some suggestions might be off topic, or they might be inappropriate, and you have to decide which ones to accept. But you have to understand that you've made a contract with everyone else that you're going to do your best to try and improve and constructively critique the work. So that's sort of the ideal workshop environment. And if people listening find themselves in one of these other ones, then that's a toxic environment. And I would say ditch it and try again somewhere else. Don't knock the format, rather recognize that it's not being employed in maybe the best way where you find yourself.
Yeah, because certainly there's
So
been
that's Yeah.
Because there's been some discussion about that, the particular format of the gag rule of when you submit a story and everyone else has read it, you sit down as author, and basically you face a firing squad of everyone having their opportunity to critique your work, and you're not meant to respond at that time. And I believe the thinking behind that is you because it can be difficult to hear criticism of your work, that you can become emotional and angry and defensive, and you don't listen to what is being said. So the gag rule is in place so that you as authors sit there, you listen, you pay attention to all of these things, and sometimes they then add in at the end, you have a rebuttal space, either individually for each critique, or at the very end of the session, you are allowed a rebuttal. And this can be, as you said, in a toxic environment where people are being, and it's not that you can deliver pointed, accurate, and valuable criticism without being negative, without being nasty, without being mean. But in a situation like that, even constructive criticism can be quite hurtful to hear about your story, particularly depending on the makeup of the class, what style of narrative that you've been creating, what your intention was behind it. And there are a couple of different principles at work. One is, as an author, you're going to write something and you're going to send it out there. And you will not be standing at the shoulder of any of your readers. Therefore, you cannot guide their reading except with what you have in your book. And the second part of that is because of the internet, you're going to hear a lot of these things. So in some respects, it's viewed as sort of toughening you up, getting you used to receiving these sorts of criticisms and making you immune. But
yeah. So yeah, I was saying that I'm a big fan of the gag rule. I think it's definitely necessary because, as you say, you can't be out there at every bookstore defending and explaining your work. And I'm actually against any form of rebuttal because to my view, the process should not be combative. It should not be confrontational. It should not be. You just nod, you take it all in, and then you go off and think. I think that's the best way to do that. And then this gets us to some of the things to overcome on the author's side. And one of those is professionalization, and also which is learning to separate the work from the person. And some people come into workshops without the least idea of this principle. And it has to be taught. And it can be a painful process. But you have to, if you want to be a writer and you're going to send stuff out, you have to learn to separate yourself, your ego from the work. And it's a bit early yet in the discussion, but this touches on one of the major problems that I've found with fantasy authors in the workshop setting.
Yeah, but I think one of the issues with the gag rule is if you're in one of those sort of more toxic framed or negatively framed groups, I think that can be incredibly destructive. Whereas if you're in a more supportive, constructive group, then the gag rule isn't as choking.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly one of the things that I've heard people using is, okay, so the gag rule's in place, you don't respond to the criticism then and there, but you then have a meeting the next day once you've had a chance to cool off and calm down and to take in what people had said, and maybe, had a stiff drink or gone to the gym and punched a punching bag repeatedly. But you have a meeting the next day with your advisor, with the person in charge, the instructor, who goes through that criticism and says, see those points, you don't need to, that's just, don't just ignore that. That isn't valid. This is actually something, and they help you sort of winnow through the process of separating out useful information from criticism from the chaff. And the instructor's presence then is meant to be in private, your advocate and support, and to be there for the author. And it's a
that's
balance.
one way to do it. One way to organize it is to have that meeting afterwards. But of course, the instructor is there present in the circle
Mm-hmm.
and can guide at that time while it's going on. And if this person is your advisor, then you are free at any time to go and meet with them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're unhappy and angry and you stomp over to their office and say, you know, what about this? And so you would have lots, you should have lots of opportunities to do that. This goes back to the abuse, early abuses and even current abuses of the methodology here. And if you find yourself in that kind of a nasty environment, this is why workshopping sometimes has a bad reputation. People come away from it with a bad taste in their mouth. And that's why some people are really, you know, they don't like it. They had a bad experience in it. But what I'm trying to do is just, you know, defend the process. It can be done well or done poorly.
Yeah. And
the instructor, yeah, sorry. No.
I was about to say, and, you know, particularly within, I think, creative writing circles, because everyone there is an author, everyone there is trying to improve their writing, that, you know, that can be an excellent support network. And people to bounce ideas off, and people to talk to work through things. That the idea of the writer's workshop, I think, can be enormously supportive. And, you know, there's flexibility in all of the different sort of models and approaches to setting up a workshop, that there is some flexibility. And it's not just like pointing going, the gag rule is bad, because in a lot of respects, the gag rule can be really, really useful. And if you have a good instructor who is there at the time, and when someone steps over the line, they go, nope, and they shut it down, that it means that you as author don't need to, you have an advocate in your corner. But
of course,
it's always, I think it, sometimes things like, because it's called even the gag rule, people object to it, and it can be misused. But any teaching methodology can be misused.
Yeah.
Like, pedagogy is complex, and as soon as someone goes, oh, this is a really good technique, and you go, well, that wouldn't work in my classroom or my lecture theater because of X, Y, or Z. And it's probably true, because we all approach teaching in different ways, and we all have different styles, much as authors have different styles and approaches to writing.
So yeah, I mean, I've gone on and I have taught creative writing workshops at the university level, and in Canada, US, and in mine, I also like to bring in literature as well, because I feel that too many of the writers aren't readers, and so I will a couple of short stories bring in to be workshopped. And these would be pieces that have obvious flaws, perhaps, that I want to guide people towards identifying, or pieces that, you know, have room for improvement, and can we find those areas where it can be improved. And so I know some instructors don't want to bring in any outside exercises or writing. And then, of course, we've been talking about the academic setting. I mean, there are also writers' workshops outside of the academic setting.
Yeah.
You know, Clarion is famous as more of a sort of practical, non-academic, in that it's not part of a, you know, it's sort of on its own. So, yes, it was loss of room. I'm identifying what I've seen are common things that are often going on within workshops, and you know, you're right about the gag. You know, it's against professionalization. If you want to be in, say, academia or business or wherever, you can't just jump up and jump on someone the moment that they say something that you don't like. And you have to sort of learn that everyone's going to have a very different opinion on things than you might. And at the undergrad level, again, this is how to be a professional, how to behave in academia. We're teaching that. It's less necessary at the graduate level. Also, what's being taught is the other side of the coin, which is editing. Trying to teach people how to be editors and how to edit. And because that's a skill also that has to be cultivated. And seeing it done by, seem to be really good at putting their finger on some sort of flaw or error and seeing how it's done is really educational, and it helps people develop their own editing skills that they can, of course, then use and apply to, hopefully, to their own work.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, it's one of those things that's very difficult sometimes to explain to people, where you can show them a paragraph and you go, read this paragraph, and they go, something in that will feel wrong to you. And people go, yeah, there's something not quite right. And you go, okay, now look at the second sentence. Is that where the wrongness starts? And they go, yeah, it is. It's the second sentence. Now look at how the object and subject are being, oh, and it's, editing is really weird in that it takes a while to get used to it, because we all have that when we read, of going, it's like your eye snags on something, or it, the way I describe it is almost like it feels wrong. And then as soon as you get that feeling, you look at it and you see what the issue is, and you narrow down, and you can become very, very specific and immediately put your finger and go, it's this sentence here, or it's the fact that these words here are not in line with the previous words that were being used to create tone or style or whatever. All of these different things, and because it's so nebulous, it can be quite difficult to explain. And it's not magical, but it, like anything, it is a skill you develop over time from reading a lot of different things and from writing. And it is, I think it is always easier to edit someone else's work than to edit your own.
Oh yes, much easier. Yeah. So at least from what I am preaching is, of course, workshopping as a craft. It's something you can develop and practice. You look at models to emulate, etc. So it's focused on how, the how to write. Now, the other side of their issue is what. And it's really, this is where we're getting towards content. Yeah, so you should not, I think it's very dangerous to wade into what you may or may not write, which is a content-based critique or a guidance. And so what the workshop, I think, has to stay on the how, just the techniques and methodology, how to write, and then let people go off and write whatever they want to write, but at least you've helped them hone their tools.
Yeah. And, I completely agree with that, because the idea that a workshop is going to teach you how to write in one particular style, I find that so limiting and abhorrent as a concept. I think that workshops should really be about giving authors as many tools as possible at their disposal, so that when they go off to write what it is that they want to write, they know how to write like Hemingway or Faulkner, or like Octavia Butler, or like Frank Herbert, or like J.R.R. Tolkien, or like whoever, that they can then discover their own voice, their own style, and write about the things that they want to write about. And the workshop has essentially just given you all of the different techniques that you can employ. Do you want to write in idiom? Do you want to write in the vernacular? Do you want to write in dialect? Do you want very formal? As long as you understand what all of the different things are and the effects that they cause, no one can tell you what to write. I think workshops are great at giving you the tools that you need to create the thing.
So, this gets us then to workshopping and fantasy, or genre writing. And way back, of course, I encountered a lot of this because I started off quite a ways back, and there was and still is a fair amount of academic snobbery.
Yeah.
And fantasy-based genre fiction or science fiction or mysteries, detective, westerns. Many of these are not welcome in a lot of workshops and creative writing programs. That's not the case entirely. There are some that are open to these and welcome them, but for the most part, you'll still encounter a lot of that academic snobbery still there. The other thing is, I found that because world building, world creation is very intimate and very personal, I've seen a lot of people unable to separate their work from themselves and have taken any form of criticism, even the gentlest of editorial suggestions, as an attack on their work, and they won't consider it at all. Like, how dare you suggest I change this or that? And I've seen a lot of that.
Is that a subtle dig at me?
But you understand that because they built this world and it's theirs and no one knows it as well as they do, how could you possibly have any input here? Now, if that's the case, and I've seen this, is people who reject any and all suggestions, I have to say, well, why are you here then? You don't need to be here. We have nothing to offer you. But I guess, some people come in just to have their genius recognized and be stroked and that sort of thing.
I've encountered that as well. And when people have come back to me saying, oh no, but you just don't understand how this works. And I went, well, clearly I don't, because, I had raised that issue. And this maybe is something that we can work on to make it clearer in your text why this is not a problem. So we can find different places where maybe you could add in a little bit more detail or refine it, because my understanding is clearly a misunderstanding of what you wanted me to know about the world. And sometimes that is enough for an author who had been defensive to go, oh, well, okay. But again, there are authors who really don't want to hear that, and that it's my fault for being too stupid. And
yeah, also in, say, a standard, common, run-of-the-day academic undergrad creative writing workshop, you'll find the majority of the people there probably aren't fantasy readers. Like a good portion maybe, but the majority could very well not be, and don't think much of the genre either. And in fact, they aren't interested in it at all. And they might say, well, I don't read this stuff. I don't understand it. I've got nothing to say. But again, that's an abdication of their duties in the workshop contract. You have to take the same tools that you're applying to a contemporary, realistic, modern fiction piece and apply it to the fantasy piece and make that effort. Don't just say, oh, this is garbage, I don't like this stuff. So there's responsibilities on both sides.
yeah, and I think, again, as a tool for writers who really want to write in a certain genre, be it literary fiction or they really want to write detective noir, but learning some of the techniques from, say, epic fantasy or from cyberpunk or from gothic horror, learning those techniques can inform your writing of your detective noir. And so the workshop is the perfect place to practice this, to learn additional techniques, because that might help you create a truly original take of detective noir, because you're bringing in an element that is not common in that genre. And that's something we see a lot when people talk about, oh, this work is so original and so fresh, because it's a science fiction work that is using whatever tool, and someone points out, but there's a bunch of horror writers already do that, and it's we get so used to sort of pigeonholing and focusing, hyper focusing on single genres, and that's why, you know, we constantly say to people, read widely, read read from different cultures, read from different time periods, read from different genres, because that gives you an amazing education. And these are all things that you can bring to bear as an author, but also as a reader, that techniques don't trip you up anymore.
Mm. Another common problem that fantasy writers encounter submitting manuscripts to workshops is what I call the long reveal. It can take a very long time to set up your world, to get the machinery moving, and to do all of that. It can take, you know, chapters and chapters to manage that. But in a workshop, maybe you only get 10 pages, as the first 10 pages of your novel. And so the readers will say, well, nothing's going on. You know, if they're not used to the genre, they're unwilling to give it as much patience as is necessary. And you can still critique the writing there, of course, but you just have to understand that all will be revealed in time. Just don't worry, you know. And so it's that rate of reveal that's tends to be much longer in the genre than in other formats.
And I think this is why sometimes you see advice, and to be honest, it is good advice. Like, hook your reader with your first sentence, hook your reader with your first paragraph, hook your reader with your first page. That if you've hit the first sentence, and you've hit the first paragraph, and you've hit the first page, and the reader is engrossed, they will read on and will want to discover, which, you know, is one of the arguments you have for, yeah, that's why I stuck a prologue in, because the prologue is essentially a little short story that is very, very punchy at the start to hook the reader in. And then I have well, no, because my story is much bigger than that. But it's this balance. And I think we've found with a lot of modern readership that our attention spans have shortened, that our ability to defer gratification for things, we are less patient with information now. We want a lot more of it upfront and faster than previous generations. And it is a movement that we particularly see in genre fiction.
Yeah, and so here's a lesson then, right, for young up-and-coming authors. Don't take your time so much. Maybe you could use a more punchy style. It's give and take, and you know, you're searching for a recipe for success that will interest the readers, get sold, and still satisfy you artistically and creatively. So it's a balance.
Yeah, and obviously, like the classic opening line that everyone should use was, "It was a dark and stormy night."
I was thinking more, "Call me Ishmael."
But, you know, and the thing is, what makes an opening sentence a good hook? And it's going to be entirely dependent on the author and the genre. That it could be like, "Call me Ishmael," that, you know, this is a direct address almost to the reader, which is immediately arresting your attention. Or you could have, you know, an action sequence as someone is being chased, or you could have starships exploding, you know, or you could go for something that is actually very somber, to create an entirely, like, standing at a graveside. That, you know, if that's how you start, people are, whoa, that started out dark. But it all depends on what it is that you're trying to evoke, what type of narrative it is being tied to.
Yeah, so here's a topic, right? In writing, opening lines, and that could be a topic for one of the classes, right? You would still be workshopping some stories, but then you'd also set aside 45 minutes or half an hour as the instructor to talk about opening lines. and give an exercise or something. You know, here's something, make up an opening line for it. So this is one of the ways you can tackle topics in writing in the creative writing format. And this is a perfectly good one for that.
And that's the thing. It's every time I try to explain to people that narrative is complicated. Like, oh yeah, but I've been reading books for ages. It's really easy. You just read them. And you but trying to understand how they actually accomplish the things that they accomplish. And given how radically different writing styles are and narratives are, and the numerous different ways that similar effects can be achieved, it's a lot of moving parts to hold in your head. And seeing good examples, or even horrendous examples, like it was a dark and stormy night. Well, that doesn't seem too bad to me. And it's because it's incredibly cliched. And if you're aware it's an incredible cliche, then you go, it was a dark and stormy night. You can't start your story that way. Why not? It's a perfectly good way. And you have it as
I will do that. Yeah, it's a creative challenge. Yeah, the general rule now, I think, is just never start with "it was."
But even the choice of tense, writers who say, "Oh, I would never write in present tense," you go, but a workshop is the perfect opportunity to play with it, to find out how that take something that you've written, switch it into the present tense, because that will give you experience with it, see the limits or the strengths or the weaknesses of that particular technique. And it's the same if you're writing in present tense, turn it into past tense just to see what effect it has. And because workshops are this protected area where you can experiment, this is the perfect opportunity to experiment in
yeah,
that.
I mean, that's an ideal approach, for a budding author, is to treat it like a field for experimentation, to see what you're good at, that sort of thing. Work on weaknesses. If you have a perceived weakness, try and work on it and do a short story featuring that and working on it. I mean, that's a great approach to the whole opportunity that you're being presented with with this class.
Yeah. I think that one of the weaknesses of creative writing workshops in general is the focus on short story. And that's an entirely practical and pragmatic limitation, because you can't ask everyone to churn out a novel every week for everyone to read and then critique. That it has to be manageable. So long enough to show technique and show understanding of narrative or whatever the particular aspect is, but short enough that it is manageable, that people who have to read 10 of these have time to read 10, can annotate 10, and you have time to discuss 10. That,
exactly. Yes.
So a potential limitation, I think, is the emphasis on short stories, because obviously what you do in a short story is not necessarily what you're going to do in a novel.
Well, you can regard it as a chapter if you wanted to. From a novelist's point of view, you could regard it as a very short chapter, and you can pad it out afterwards with a couple of other plot lines that I'm not talking about real padding. I'm talking about stuff that should legitimately be there, but isn't in a very lean version. But I think it's actually extremely educational in that you get that beautiful arc in a short story. And if you can get that arc right, you can then apply it almost anywhere. It's
it's like all of these things. I don't think it is necessary. There have been great authors from the past and from today who have never once attended a creative writing course ever. No workshopping, nothing. But I think for the vast majority of us, attending courses like this helps. It is something added. As I said at the beginning, sometimes a shortcut to gaining greater understanding. Doesn't mean you can't do it on your own, but I think that workshops have a very useful place in creative writing, particularly when the instructor and the writers are in sync, when they're all aiming toward that same constructive goal and they
When
all
it's
understand each other.
working, when it's working the way it should work. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, definitely. And again, you have people who aren't English majors who are just curious, just want to be there, and everyone has something they can bring to the table, and it can be really wonderful and enriching that way.
Do you think there's anything specific about fantasy that is difficult to workshop? Because you mentioned world building, and obviously, world building is not traditionally part of a writer's workshop because it's very content focused.
Yeah, it's set apart. Funnily, as Steve and I have sort of railed against, it's set apart for fantasy, and yet that's not true. Even contemporary fiction authors, when they're creating a scene or creating a city or buildings, they're world building. It's the same thing. Well, I think it's on the readers who aren't practiced in the genre. There's a perception of immaturity within the genre, that it's for young readers. It's a YA area, and they're not interested in spending their time in that field, you know. Whereas, of course, from our point of view, that's a perfectly legitimate area. It's a big market, you know. You can be a YA writer, but a lot of writers who are outside of the genre, who read only contemporary lit, see it as more sort of as a youthful and younger targeted topic that they consider immature.
And I have never understood people dismissing YA fiction because in order to effectively communicate and move and create emotional resonance in a young adult reader using a lower level of literary bar, so you've lowered the register of the language, that using that, being able to speak to a younger reader who has fewer life experiences, is not as well read, and most younger readers don't want to be reading. There are other things competing for their time. You go, if you can captivate that audience, that's a sign of a good author.
Oh yeah, I agree entirely. That's a really tough thing to accomplish, and if you can do it, that's great. But you know, as I said, most of these workshops are in an academic setting. You know, they're serious, and so they're not going to spend their time on such things, and they're going to work on pursuing established standard, what we call mainstream, contemporary, mimetic, realistic fiction, right? And so even plot and plotting is often sort of considered, you know, not necessarily worth attention. It's more focused on techniques of interiority, and so naturally, because that's the bias, where you might find yourself, and just keep that in mind, and know that that's the environment that you're swimming in, and that's how you have to play. You know, like for example, I've submitted fantasy pieces that I didn't call them that. I called them magic realism. And suddenly it was okay.
and and this is the double standard. It's fantasy and
Yeah.
science fiction. No, magic realism and speculative fiction. Oh my, this is very imaginative, Cameron.
Yeah.
And that's a double standard that certain academics have. Not all academics.
Yeah, I know. I'm just warning people that, you know, you'll encounter this occasionally. It's
Yeah, and
mind.
and again, it's the ghettoization of literary genres and thinking about, oh, it's a commercial genre, therefore it is product. And you go, no, it's still narrative, it is still writing, it is still authorship, it's still an art, there's still craft involved. But like everything, well, what's the old saw? 99% of everything is crap. You know, there are always going to be those things. And yeah, some commercial fiction is it's not particularly good writing. But at the same time, if it's selling, if it's entertaining people, there's something to it. And, being aware of that.
Well, and not even that, just that there's in it a potential to teach something that is, worthwhile. Even if it's mostly geared for entertainment, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can only do that. You can use entertainment to, really look deeply into certain subjects, and the entertainment draws the reader along. So yeah, product. A lot of the point of view from English literary programs is that their job is to winnow the chaff from the gold, right? They got to find the good stuff, and all the rest is crap. And so that's their job, right? So of course, fantasy is dismissed, science fiction is dismissed. It's not worth their attention, and they're just looking for those one few worthy texts that can sustain a very deep analysis, and who's writing it. They're looking for, in the past, elegance, right? And you're not going to find that in much of the pulp fiction. So it was not, they weren't interested in it at all. And that's a carryover from those sort of earlier attitudes.
Yeah. And it is one of those things that I find deeply frustrating, because there are some incredibly talented authors across science fiction and fantasy and horror who write not only incredibly entertaining and engrossing novels, but that are fabulously constructed or imaginatively constructed, that are doing things with voice or doing things with point of view, or are experimenting with things that are challenging preconceptions, or are tackling really important topics, but are doing it in a way that is palatable and non-didactic, that it is a way to engage with a subject rather than go, that thing is bad, you should not do that thing. And I think it is a shame, and that so many academics still have those blinkers. But I would say that in recent years, a number of academics, there's been a very strong movement and awareness of the ability of science fiction and fantasy, not only as fertile grounds for brilliant writing, but as fascinating text to study, to teach, to engage students with. And that story and narrative event are not dirty words. That, yeah, that is an essential element of narrative. And the focus away from that is quite an old-fashioned focus now. And it's not that you still can't have good writing like that, but why dismiss one of the main elements?
Yeah, that's a historical bias in the discipline. And yes, you're right. It's really broadening out. Like even comics are being, looked at as actual serious subjects for narrative analysis, and a lot of this, I think, has to do with other growing departments, like cultural studies, for example, is really contributing here and pushing things, whereas English departments are a bit more staid, a bit less willing to take on the new. This has been my experience. I'm sorry, but for example, my partner Jerry, she does accept fantasy and science fiction pieces in her workshop here at University of Alaska, and so do other universities. I'm not bashing the system. Other university workshops are taking it in as well. But growing up, I had an instructor, even at the graduate level in creative writing, who just would not. It was a rule: no genre fiction allowed. And that was it. You just couldn't do it. So, it's sort of we're in a process here.
Yeah, but weird enough, to go to like one of the points that I mentioned earlier, if you really want to write fantasy, then going to a workshop that doesn't let you write fantasy is not necessarily the be all and end all, because you can still learn a lot of the techniques.
And but, I did. I stayed here. Yeah. Going, yeah.
But obviously a workshop that teaches you both lit fic and or contemporary fiction and aspects of fantasy fiction, that would be more useful. But I would be worried if you wanted to write fantasy and you went to a workshop that was only fantasy, that I feel is actually, weirdly enough, potentially limiting, because you've already narrowed your focus so much that you're not paying attention to the broader narrative landscape.
Yeah. So what we've been talking about and what you've been talking about in many ways is that, ideally the recognition that good writing is good writing, no matter where you encounter it. And it can be the techniques of it, the how and all the rest, the tools can be taught and refined and honed. That creative side of it, that's what the author brings, the creativity. So yes, no matter where you might look, you can still find good writing. It's the same almost everywhere. So yeah, I mean, those past blinkers, certainly I hope will come down even more. And
Well, Cameron, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about this. If people have questions about this, then maybe they can leave them in the comments, and maybe we can return to it and address some specific things that commenters bring up. But thank you very much for joining me to chat about this.
Oh, thank you, AP.
And for those of you still watching, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. It does mean a lot to me. And see you in the next one.